Marceline has always been a paradox, ancient and youthful, powerful and fragile, playful and profoundly lonely. She exists in that strange twilight between immortality and memory, where time keeps moving, but the heart never fully catches up. To understand Marceline is to understand what it means to grow up when you can't grow old, to outlive your own innocence and watch the world change faster than your heart can adapt. In Ooh, she is the eternal teenager, the queen of vampires who still sings about her father, her childhood home, and the people she's lost. Her story is not about age in years, but age in spirit, the slow ache of realizing that growing up doesn't always mean moving on. Marceline's fear of growing up begins not with her fangs, but with her memories. Long before she became the Vampire Queen, she was a little girl trying to survive in the ruins of the old world. The earth she knew was broken, its skies turned red, its people scattered. She had no one but her music, her imagination, and whatever companion's fate allowed her for a time. For most people, childhood is defined by safety and learning. For Marceline, it was defined by survival and loss. She learned to sing before she learned what stability felt like. In that kind of world, growing up doesn't come from years, it comes from grief. And yet, for all her centuries, Marceline still clings to the things that made her feel young. Her songs, her humour, her occasional immaturity, they're not signs of denial, but shields against the loneliness of eternity. Immortality gives her time, but it also takes away context. She grows older without the people who once made her feel grounded. Each century adds distance between who she was and who she's trying to become. And so, instead of becoming the wise, serene, immortal archetype, Marceline remains a kind of emotional time capsule. Her punk attitude, her sarcasm, her bursts of temper, they all mask something more tender, the fear that if she lets go of who she used to be, she'll lose herself completely. Her fear of growing up is not about physical aging, but about emotional change, the kind that forces you to forgive, to let go, to open up again after being hurt. She resists that kind of growth for a long time. It's easier to live in anger than in acceptance, easier to call yourself a monster than to risk being loved again. That's why her relationships always seem to circle around reconciliation. Whether it's with Princess Bubblegum, Simon, or even her father, every connection in her life reflects a different side of her struggle with emotional maturity. Each one challenges her to be vulnerable, to face what she's avoided for centuries, the pain of becoming someone new. Her relationship with Simon is the clearest thread to her lost childhood. In him, she once had a protector, a makeshift father figure in a dying world. When she remembers him, she's remembering safety, even if it was fragile. The tragedy is that Simon, too, changed, not by choice, but through the crown's curse. In losing him, Marceline lost the last remnant of her early innocence. The man who once sang to her and cared for her became a ghost of himself, leaving her to wander through centuries with only the echo of their bond. Growing up, for Marceline, means realizing that even the people who love you can disappear, that sometimes the roles reverse, and the child becomes the caretaker, the guardian, the one who remembers. It's a kind of growth that never stops hurting. Then there's Princess Bubblegum, the mirror through which Marceline finally begins to understand herself. Their relationship is the emotional center of her adulthood, and it's where her fear of growing up truly starts to unravel. Bubblegum is the embodiment of order, control, and progress, the very things Marceline resists. And yet, beneath their differences, they both crave understanding. Their connection endures through conflict, jealousy, and misunderstanding because they represent two halves of the same emotional evolution. One afraid of losing control, the other afraid of losing herself. Loving bubblegum forces Marceline to confront her fear of change. It pushes her to stop hiding behind bitterness and to recognize that growing up doesn't have to mean letting go of youth. It can mean transforming it into something deeper, more stable, more accepting. Music is where this transformation becomes most visible. Every song Marceline sings is a snapshot of where she is emotionally at that moment, a diary she never stops writing. Her music carries her memories, but also her confessions. When she sings about her father, about broken bonds, about friendship and longing, she's not just performing, she's preserving fragments of who she was, so that she doesn't lose them completely. It's through her songs that she finds the courage to grow, even when she doesn't realize it. Music is the one thing that allows her to mature without erasing her past. It bridges the child who was scared and the woman who keeps pretending she isn't. But immortality twists that process. When time becomes endless, emotional growth becomes harder to sustain. Most people grow by comparing themselves to those around them, by moving through shared milestones, love, loss, aging, death. Marceline doesn't have that rhythm. The people she loves change or vanish while she stays. That imbalance makes it difficult for her to know who she is. She's caught between the human experiences she remembers and the supernatural existence she can't escape. Her vampire nature keeps her frozen, but her human heart keeps pushing her forward. This tension defines her entire being, the ache of still wanting to grow in a body that never changes. That's why her fear of growing up is also a fear of loss. Every time she opens herself to others, she risks being left behind again. It's easier to stay the aloof rock star, the sarcastic loner, the one who doesn't care. But deep down, she cares too much. Her love is enormous. It's just guarded. Growing up, for her, means learning to live with that vulnerability instead of denying it. It means realizing that time doesn't stop you from being hurt, but it also doesn't stop you from healing. By the time we see Marceline truly reconnect with the people who matter to her, it's not because she's defeated her fear, but because she's learned to carry it. She still gets insecure, still broods, still feels the sting of old wounds, but she no longer lets those feelings define her. She begins to trust that love can last, that her friendships and her bond with bubblegum don't have to fade just because everything else once did. That's her version of growing up. Not the shedding of pain, but the acceptance of it. Marceline's story reminds us that maturity isn't about forgetting who we were. It's about making peace with it. She doesn't need to abandon her punk edge or her childlike joy to grow. She just learns how to hold both at once. Her centuries of wandering, her music, her relationships, they all lead her toward one simple truth. Growing up isn't about becoming someone new. It's about learning to love the person you've always been, even when time and pain have changed you. In a world as surreal and ever-shifting as Marceline stands as a kind of emotional compass. She shows that even when the world ends and restarts, even when the faces change and memories blur, the need for connection and self-understanding never disappears. Her immortality doesn't make her immune to fear, it amplifies it. But it also gives her infinite chances to grow, to reconcile, to forgive, and to sing. The child she once was still lives inside her, not trapped but cherished. And maybe that's the secret of surviving eternity. Not escaping your past, but carrying it like a melody you keep rewriting, one verse at a time. Marceline is the girl who never stopped growing up, not in the way time demands, but in the way the heart requires. Every song she sings, every friendship she mends, every act of vulnerability is another step toward peace. Her story is a reminder that growing up isn't a moment, it's a rhythm. And though it sometimes feels lonely, it's the rhythm that keeps her and all of Ooh alive. There's a moment in every immortal's life when eternity stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like gravity. For Marceline, that shift comes not with a grand revelation, but in quiet moments, the long silences after laughter fades, the emptiness that follows every goodbye. Immortality is supposed to free her from death, but instead it chains her to time itself. Every century she survives, she becomes a little more aware that growing up is not something she can measure by years anymore. It's something she feels, the slow ache of change that never truly ends, even when the body stops aging. The shadow of immortality stretches across everything Marceline does. It's in her reluctance to form attachments, her bursts of anger when others drift away, and even in her humour, which often hides a kind of melancholy resignation. Living forever means watching everything else fade. Friends, lovers, empires, even memories, all become ghosts. At first, she tries to defy that truth with rebellion. She acts out, makes noise, creates chaos, as if volume could drown out silence. But the silence always returns. The louder she gets, the more she feels it. Immortality, for her, is not an endless party. It's an endless echo. Marceline's relationship with time is what defines her fear of growing up. Time moves for everyone else. Finn matures. Bubblegum evolves. Simon changes, breaks, and returns. But Marceline remains, physically untouched, emotionally scarred. Her kind of permanence doesn't protect her. It isolates her. There's a deep irony in that. She has all the time in the world to heal, but healing without closure is a kind of torment. Each passing generation forces her to remember the ones before. Every new friend she makes carries the shadow of those she's lost. And because she can't die, she has to live with that repetition. A cycle of connection and grief that has no end point. Her immortality also traps her in fragments of identity. The vampire, queen, the rocker, the daughter, the survivor, each title is a reflection of a different era of her life. But unlike mortals, she doesn't move linearly through them. She revisits them like old rooms, sometimes to find comfort, sometimes to hide. When she performs, she channels the girl who used to sing to herself in ruined cities. When she teases bubblegum, she becomes the mischievous spirit of her early freedom. When she isolates herself, she becomes the wary wanderer who learned not to depend on anyone. These selves don't disappear, they coexist. For Marceline, immortality is not a straight line, but a spiral. Growth doesn't mean leaving old versions of herself behind. It means learning to live with all of them. The hardest part is that the world refuses to stay still with her. Ooh rebuilds and reshapes itself constantly. Kingdoms rise and fall, landscapes change, and the people who once defined her sense of belonging disappear into legend. Marceline's fear of growing up comes partly from this instability. To grow up, you need something to grow toward, a future, a purpose, a vision of who you want to be. But when you've seen the world end and begin again, when you've watched everything you care about dissolve, how do you find meaning in the next sunrise? That's why she keeps coming back to music. In a life without structure, music becomes her timeline. Each song is a timestamp, not in years, but in emotion. Music gives her a way to hold time still, even if just for a few minutes. When she plays, she's not immortal. She's human again, reliving emotions that time can't erase. Her songs are her proof that she's still changing, still feeling, still alive in ways that immortality can't measure. They are her rebellion against eternity's indifference. But the curse of immortality is that even self-expression becomes cyclical. There are only so many ways to sing about loss before it begins to feel like repetition. And that repetition, too, scares her. It makes her wonder if she's truly evolving, or if she's just orbiting the same grief forever. Sometimes she mistakes stillness for comfort, staying in her cave, hiding from the world, pretending she's over everything. But stillness isn't peace, it's stagnation. And eventually, even she grows restless. That restlessness is what keeps her human. It's the small flicker inside her that refuses to let immortality win. The truth is, Marceline's immortality is not just about surviving time, it's about surviving herself. Centuries of solitude can erode even the strongest spirit, but she endures by creating meaning where there shouldn't be any. Through her relationships, her art, her humour, and her defiance, she keeps reinventing what life means to her. She refuses to let immortality turn her into stone. That's the secret she learns over the centuries. Eternity doesn't have to mean emptiness. It can mean infinite chances to begin again. And yet, she never fully escapes the shadow. It lingers in how she loves. Every bond she forms carries the knowledge that one day she'll be left behind. That inevitability haunts her tenderness. It's why she struggles to say what she feels until it's almost too late. It's why her songs often sound like apologies written centuries after the fact. To grow up, for her, means learning to love people anyway, knowing they'll vanish, knowing it'll hurt, and choosing them regardless. That's the most human thing about her. Her immortality also complicates her relationship with identity. Vampirism freezes her body, but it also warps her instincts. It gives her strength, flight, and transformation, but it also tempts her to withdraw, to view life from above rather than within. Sometimes she acts detached, not because she doesn't care, but because caring too deeply would tear her apart. The hunger, the isolation, the silence, they're all metaphors for emotional distance. Her vampirism is both curse and mirror. It externalizes her fear of being consumed by her own feelings. Learning to live with that duality, the predator and the poet, becomes part of her journey toward emotional maturity. When she reconnects with Simon, after so many years, it's a moment that pierces through the shadow. In that reunion, she's reminded that time doesn't always destroy what matters. Some bonds survive even the apocalypse. That realization doesn't erase her fear, but it softens it. She begins to understand that growing up doesn't mean outgrowing love. It means accepting that love changes form, from protection to memory, from presence to gratitude. Her immortality doesn't end the story. It stretches it, forcing her to find new ways to keep caring. With Princess Bubblegum, that lesson becomes even more intimate. Their relationship endures because it evolves. They argue, they drift apart, they come back together, not as the same people, but as new versions of themselves. That's the beauty of it. Even in immortality, they manage to grow together. Marceline's fear of change meets Bubblegum's obsession with control. And through that tension, both of them learn to soften. They learn that love is not about freezing time, but about trusting it. When Marceline finally lets her guard down with Bubblegum, it's not a rejection of her past, it's a reconciliation with it. She learns that eternity doesn't have to be lonely if you let someone share it with you. In the end, immortality becomes not her prison, but her canvas. Every friendship, every song, every heartbreak adds another layer to her understanding of what it means to live. The shadow never disappears, but it becomes part of the painting, depth instead of darkness. Marceline learns to see beauty in impermanence, even as she outlasts it. She learns that growth doesn't have to stop just because time does. That's why Marceline, despite her centuries, still feels young. Not because she refuses to grow up, but because she keeps finding reasons to. Every new connection, every risk, every vulnerability is an act of defiance against the shadow of immortality. She turns eternity into a rhythm, one she keeps rewriting in chords of love, pain, and laughter. In Ooh, where time bends and meaning shifts, Marceline stands as a reminder that immortality isn't about never ending, it's about never stopping. She keeps moving, keeps feeling, keeps becoming. And maybe that's what growing up really is. Not reaching a final form, but finding the courage to keep changing, even when the years no longer count. Her fear of growing up never disappears, but it transforms. It becomes her muse, her melody, her heartbeat. It's what keeps her searching, singing, loving, and living. The shadow of immortality follows her everywhere, but it never catches her, because she's always moving forward, one song at a time. For someone who has lived for centuries, memory is both a refuge and a curse. For Marceline, it is the one thing she can't escape, the invisible thread that ties every version of herself together. She remembers too much. The colours, the faces, the voices, the quiet heartbreaks that time should have softened, but never did. Her immortality makes her a collector of ghosts, and every song she writes is a small exorcism. She carries her past not because she wants to, but because there's nowhere to set it down. That's the true weight of memory, not just what it contains, but how inescapable it becomes when time refuses to let you forget. Marceline's fear of growing up is inseparable from her relationship with memory. To grow up means to move forward, to let the past fade into the distance. But for her, the past never fades. It lingers like the hum of an old amplifier that never quite turns off. She can revisit the ruins where she once wandered, hear Simon's voice in her dreams, see the faint echo of her younger self in every reflection. Each memory reminds her of who she was and who she lost along the way. And yet, even as these memories hurt her, she clings to them, because they're proof that she was once human, once loved, once part of a world that no longer exists. There's a kind of paradox in how Marceline treats her memories. She avoids talking about them, hides behind jokes and sarcasm, but she also builds her entire life around them. Her cave is filled with relics, old instruments, photographs, trinkets from forgotten places. They're not trophies, they're anchors. Each object has a story, a moment she refuses to let dissolve. It's her way of creating permanence in a life that refuses to stop moving. For most people, nostalgia is a comfort. For Marceline, it's survival. Without it, she risks losing herself entirely to time's drift. But memory, for her, is never gentle. It comes in waves, unpredictable, sometimes sweet, often cruel. There are moments when a song or a smell will pull her back centuries in an instant, and she's that little girl again, frightened and lonely, clinging to the only familiar hand left in a ruined world. Those flashes of the past keep her grounded, but they also reopen wounds that never healed. Every act of remembering becomes both an embrace and a reopening. She wants to remember, but remembering hurts. Forgetting would be easier, but forgetting would mean losing what makes her human. That's why she turns her memories into music. Each song becomes a vessel, a way to release the pain without erasing it. When she sings about loss, she's not seeking pity. She's transforming memory into art. It's her way of rewriting what time has taken from her. In her music, memory stops being static. It becomes alive again, reimagined, renewed. Through it, she learns that memories don't have to trap her, they can move with her, evolve as she does. Music becomes her emotional alchemy, turning grief into melody, pain into poetry. Still, memory isolates her. Most of the people around her can't comprehend what it means to carry centuries of experience. They can empathize, but they can't relate. When she talks about the old world, about the time before the Candy Kingdom or the rise of Ooh, her words fall like myths to those who listen. Her memories are too vast, too real, too personal to share. That isolation reinforces her fear of growing up, because how can you move forward when no one else remembers where you've been? And yet, memory is also the reason she can still love. It's what allows her to recognize herself in others, to find fragments of familiarity even in new faces. Her connection with Bubblegum thrives partly because Bubblegum, too, has lived long enough to understand the ache of memory. They both remember more than they wish they did, their mistakes, their distance, their stubborn pride. But unlike others, Bubblegum doesn't treat Marceline's past as something alien. She listens, she remembers with her. In that shared remembering, Marceline finds something she's been missing for ages. Someone who understands that memory doesn't always mean closure, that sometimes it just means company. Her bond with Simon, though, is where the weight of memory becomes most visible. For centuries, that memory defined her not as a burden, but as a wound she couldn't stop touching. Simon was her protector, her only link to love during the fall of humanity. When she remembers him, she's not remembering the Ice King who lost himself, but the man who carried her through chaos and sang her lullabies when the world was ending. Every time she saw what he became, that memory clashed with reality, and the result was agony. Growing up, for Marceline, means learning to separate who people were from who they become and still loving them both. That's the hardest lesson memory teaches her. But even memory changes with time. The details fade, the emotions shift, and sometimes Marceline wonders if what she remembers is the truth or just the version she needs it to be. Immortality blurs the line between remembering and reimagining. Her songs, though personal, might not always be faithful records. They are interpretations of emotion, not documents of fact. And that's what makes them powerful. They reveal not what happened, but what it meant. Marceline learns to see her memories not as weights dragging her down, but as stories she can retell in new ways, finding fresh meaning in old pain. The danger is when she forgets to live outside of them. There are times when memory tempts her into stillness, when she spends too long looking backward and misses the present unfolding in front of her. She isolates herself in the comfort of the familiar, replaying moments in her mind because they're safer than facing what's new. But Ooh never stops changing. Finn grows, Bubblegum evolves, even the land itself reshapes. If Marceline wants to belong, she has to keep moving with it, and that's what she slowly learns. Memory should be carried, not lived in. Her eventual peace doesn't come from erasing the past, but from forgiving it, forgiving Simon, forgiving Bubblegum, and most importantly, forgiving herself. She realizes that clinging to memory doesn't keep her loved ones alive. It just keeps her from living. So she learns to hold her memories more gently, to let them fade at the edges without fear. She begins to understand that forgetting isn't betrayal, it's mercy. It's what allows new memories to grow. In the quiet of her later years, Marceline finally starts to use her music differently. Instead of writing from pain, she writes from acceptance. The songs become softer, less haunted, more reflective. They're still nostalgic, but they're no longer desperate. She stopped trying to preserve everything exactly as it was. Instead, she honors the fact that even her memories are living things, imperfect, fluid, and always changing. That shift marks the moment she truly grows up. Not because she's abandoned her past, but because she's finally made peace with it. The weight of memory will always be part of Marceline. It's in her voice, her laughter, her silences. But what once crushed her now gives her shape. Her memories are no longer just ghosts, they're foundations. They're the reason she can still love, still create, still hope. They remind her that even in a world of endless time, what matters most are the fleeting moments that made her who she is. And in remembering them, she gives them life again. Marceline's story teaches that memory isn't the opposite of growth, it's part of it. To carry the past and still move forward is its own kind of courage. Every time she strums her bass, every time she sings a verse from long ago, she's proving that memory doesn't have to trap you. It can guide you. It can remind you of the love, the loss, and the laughter that made you worth remembering at all. For Marceline, music has always been more than sound. It's the language of her heart, the one place where she allows herself to be fully honest. In Ooh, where everything is strange and alive and constantly changing, music is her anchor. But more than that, it's her mirror. Every note she plays, every lyric she writes, reveals something she's too afraid to say aloud. It's through her songs that Marceline learns to be vulnerable, to expose the quiet, trembling parts of herself that centuries of loneliness have tried to bury. Vulnerability doesn't come naturally to her. On the surface, Marceline is confidence personified, witty, bold, effortlessly cool. She walks through Ooh as if the world itself is her stage. But underneath that swagger is someone who's terrified of being misunderstood. For so long, she used humour, teasing, and even mischief as shields. It's easier to make people laugh than to let them see how deeply you feel. But music bypasses all that. It doesn't ask for explanations. It doesn't need translation. It simply is. In her songs, she lets herself be seen, not the vampire queen or the rock star, but the little girl who still aches for connection. Her earliest songs are fragments of her pain disguised as rebellion. They're rough, raw, and jagged, filled with the kind of energy that comes from trying to scream your sadness into something that won't echo back. When she sings alone in her cave, it's not performance, it's release. Those early melodies sound defiant, but they're really just the sound of someone trying not to break. Her bass becomes both weapon and comfort, a way to control the chaos inside her, to turn emotion into vibration. The act of playing is as important as the music itself. It's her form of breathing. As she grows emotionally, her music changes too. The edges soften. The lyrics grow more open, less guarded. She stops singing at people and starts singing to them. Vulnerability becomes part of her evolution, the bridge between isolation and intimacy. It's through her music that she begins to reconnect with those she loves. Each song becomes a kind of confession, a reaching out. One of the most meaningful aspects of Marceline's vulnerability is that she doesn't always realize when she's showing it. When she writes songs about Simon or bubblegum, she often plays them off as casual improvisations, as if the feelings behind them are no big deal. But those who know her can hear the truth. Her melodies always betray her. Even when her words are playful, the tone of her voice carries the weight of centuries, longing, affection, regret. It's that subtle honesty that makes her songs resonate not only with the characters around her, but with the viewers who understand that vulnerability rarely announces itself. It leaks through the cracks. Music also becomes her way of apologizing, something she struggles to do directly. For someone who's lived so long, Marceline still finds it hard to say, "I'm sorry." Pride, fear, and self-preservation often get in the way. But when she writes a song, she bypasses those defenses. Through melody, she can express remorse without humiliation, love without hesitation, and grief without despair. Her songs become bridges back to people she's lost connection with, especially Bubblegum. In their complicated relationship, words have often failed them, but music never has. A simple song can say what centuries of silence could not. What's remarkable about Marceline's vulnerability is how it transforms those around her. Ooh is a world of contrasts, absurd, cosmic, and at times chaotic, but her songs cut through that with pure emotion. They remind everyone listening that, underneath the magic and the madness, the inhabitants of Ooh are still capable of human feeling. Her music becomes the emotional heartbeat of the world, small, sincere moments that balance the grandeur of everything else. Even the most fantastical stories in Adventure Time find grounding in her voice. When Marceline sings, the world stops being strange for a while. It just feels real. That's part of her power, not her vampiric abilities, not her immortality, but her empathy. Vulnerability, for her, isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the ability to stand in front of eternity and say, I still care. In her music, she admits to being lonely, afraid, unsure. And in doing so, she invites others to feel the same. She turns personal pain into shared experience. That's why so many of her songs, while deeply individual, resonate universally. They're lullabies for anyone who's ever been scared to grow up, scared to lose, scared to love. As she reconnects with Bubblegum later in life, vulnerability becomes not just emotional, but reciprocal. Their relationship thrives because it finally becomes honest. For centuries they danced around what they felt, pride and fear keeping them apart, but music breaks that silence. When Marceline sings from her heart, Bubblegum listens. She doesn't interrupt, doesn't analyze, she simply feels. That act of listening is what heals them. Marceline learns that being vulnerable isn't just about expressing yourself. It's about trusting that someone will hold your truth without judgment. And Bubblegum does. That's what allows their love to grow, the shift from guarded affection to mutual openness. Marceline's vulnerability also redefines what it means to be strong. For so long, she equated strength with endurance, surviving loss, suppressing pain, outlasting the world. But through music, she learns that strength can also mean softness. It can mean crying in front of others, admitting you need them, allowing your heart to stay open even when it's been broken 1,000 times. The older she gets, the more she understands that survival without vulnerability isn't living, it's merely existing. Music becomes her rebellion against emotional numbness. And yet, even as she embraces that softness, Marceline never loses her edge. Her vulnerability doesn't erase her boldness, it completes it. The same energy that once fueled her defiance now fuels her empathy, her humour, her confidence, her playfulness. They're no longer defences, but expressions of comfort in her own skin. By learning to be vulnerable, she no longer needs to hide behind personas. She becomes whole. There's a particular beauty in how her songs evolve across her lifetime. Early on, they're about loneliness and misunderstanding, a young spirit trying to make sense of a broken world. Later, they become songs of connection, reconciliation, and peace. Her voice matures, but it never loses that aching sincerity. Each performance is a testament to how far she's come. From isolation to intimacy, from fear to trust. And yet, even in her calmest moments, there's always that flicker of vulnerability, because she knows it's what keeps her real. Vulnerability also changes how Marceline views immortality. When she lets people in, eternity stops feeling like a curse Every new connection adds colour to the centuries. Time doesn't stretch endlessly in front of her anymore. It fills with texture, laughter, memory, and love. By opening herself to others, she discovers that growing up isn't about shedding pain, but about transforming it into understanding. Her songs become living proof of that transformation. In the end, Marceline's vulnerability is her legacy. It's what turns her from a myth into a person. She teaches that strength doesn't come from walls or fangs or eternal youth. It comes from honesty. It comes from the courage to say, "This is who I am, and I'm still learning how to be." Every time she performs, she's not just sharing music, she's sharing her journey. Her melodies carry centuries of laughter and loss, but they also carry hope, the belief that it's never too late to open your heart again. And that's the most powerful sound of all, not the echo of immortality, but the fragile, beautiful sound of someone finally allowing themselves to be known. For Marceline, love has never been a luxury, it's a form of survival. In a world that has ended and begun again, where she has outlived empires and friends alike, love is the one force that keeps her from fading into the background of eternity. It isn't sentimental, and it isn't easy. It's raw, complicated, and sometimes painful. But for someone who has lived as long as she has, love is the only thing that makes immortality bearable. It's not something she chases for pleasure or companionship. It's what keeps her heart human in a life that's tried for centuries to turn it to stone. The way Marceline loves is shaped by loss. Every connection she's ever had has been coloured by the awareness that it could disappear. That knowledge makes her hesitant, guarded, even combative at times. When she teases people, when she acts aloof or sarcastic, it's not cruelty, it's protection. Love, to her, is dangerous. It exposes her to the possibility of heartbreak, and heartbreak is the one kind of wound even immortality can't heal quickly. But despite that fear, she can't stop loving. It's instinctive, deeper than thought, almost defiant. Each time she opens her heart again, she's choosing to fight against the pull of numbness that eternity threatens to impose. Her earliest experience of love was with Simon, and that bond shaped everything that came after. He was her first protector, her first family, the first person who made her feel seen. What makes that love so powerful is that it was born in chaos, a child and a man holding on to each other in a world that had lost its sense of safety. Simon's love wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was simple, gentle, human, and it taught Marceline something crucial. That love could exist even in ruin. That tenderness could survive the apocalypse. But when she lost him to the Ice King's madness, the lesson twisted. She learned that love also means helplessness, that no matter how fiercely you care, you can't always save the ones you love. That realization followed her for centuries, quietly shaping her every interaction. After Simon, Marceline's understanding of love became fragmented. She sought it in fleeting friendships, in rebellious freedom, in her music, but nothing lasted. Mortality always got in the way. Everyone she cared about grew old, changed, or vanished while she remained. So she started keeping her feelings close, loving people from a distance. It was easier to be the mysterious friend, the teasing rival, the one who left first. That way, she could avoid the pain of being left behind. But even as she tried to harden herself, her heart refused to follow. She couldn't help caring, even when it hurt. Her relationship with Princess Bubblegum finally shattered that cycle. What began as rivalry and misunderstanding slowly evolved into one of the most enduring loves in OO. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was something richer, more human. They clashed constantly because they mirrored each other's fears. Bubblegum's need for control met Marceline's fear of abandonment, and together they created a tension that neither could fully resolve. But underneath that friction was genuine affection. They saw through each other's masks. Marceline's chaos drew out Bubblegum's spontaneity, and Bubblegum's discipline gave Marceline a sense of grounding. Their love wasn't about changing one another, it was about learning to coexist, to accept the contradictions that made them both who they were. For Marceline, that acceptance was revolutionary. It proved that love doesn't have to mean losing yourself. It doesn't have to demand sacrifice or transformation. With Bubblegum, she could be both the vampire queen and the vulnerable musician, the immortal and the insecure partner. She didn't have to choose. Love became a space where she could be all versions of herself without fear. That's why, even after centuries of emotional distance, she kept coming back to Bubblegum. There was safety there, not in the absence of conflict, but in the certainty of connection. No matter how long they drifted apart, they always found their way back. The beauty of Marceline's love is that it's not static. It evolves as she does. Early on, her love was reactive, fueled by fear, anger, and longing. Over time, it becomes calm, patient, grounded. She learns to love without clinging, to care without control. This growth mirrors her healing. For someone who once believed that love only led to loss, she learns to see it as endurance, as something that persists even when everything else changes. Her love for Bubblegum, Simon, and even for herself becomes proof that connection doesn't have to fade with time. It can adapt, it can deepen. Her music plays a crucial role in this evolution. It's how she processes love, how she keeps it alive, even when the people she loves are gone. Every song she writes about Simon is a way of keeping his memory safe, not frozen in grief, but alive in gratitude. Every song about Bubblegum is a love letter disguised as melody, an acknowledgement of both the pain and the beauty of their bond. In a sense, her music becomes a form of emotional immortality. Through it, her love transcends time in ways her body already does. But what makes Marceline's story remarkable is how she eventually learns to love herself. For centuries, she carried shame about her vampirism, about her past, about the things she couldn't fix. She saw herself as a misfit, a monster, a relic of a world that no longer existed. Her relationships often reflected that insecurity. She expected to be left, so she tried to leave first. But love, over time, taught her something different. Simon's unconditional care, Bubblegum's forgiveness, even her friendships with beings like Finn and Jake, all of it showed her that she didn't have to earn affection by pretending to be someone else. She could just be. That realization is what transforms her fear of growing up into something softer. Growing up, for Marceline, stops meaning leaving things behind and starts meaning loving things honestly. Love doesn't erase her pain or her immortality, but it gives them meaning. It's what ties her past and present together, the bridge between the frightened child she once was and the wise, compassionate woman she becomes. In loving others, she learns how to live with herself. There's also a quiet resilience in how Marceline approaches love. She doesn't idealize it. She knows it can hurt. She's seen it end, but she still chooses it. That choice, to love again after loss, to care after centuries of loneliness, is her greatest act of courage. Immortality tries to convince her that nothing matters because everything fades, but love keeps proving her wrong. Every connection, no matter how brief, leaves an imprint that time can't erase. Every act of kindness, every shared laugh, every song sung to another soul is a defiance of oblivion. In the end, Marceline's story is not about surviving eternity, it's about surviving through love. It's about learning that vulnerability doesn't make you weak, that connection doesn't make you fragile, it makes you alive. Her love for Bubblegum endures not because of destiny, but because they keep choosing each other. Her love for Simon endures because it's built on gratitude rather than grief. And her love for herself endures because it's built on forgiveness, the final step in every kind of healing. Love doesn't solve Marceline's loneliness, but it transforms it. It turns emptiness into openness. It teaches her that being eternal doesn't mean being alone. It means having infinite chances to reach out, to understand, to begin again. Love becomes her rhythm, her compass, her reason to keep singing even when the world goes quiet. By the time the world of Ooh finds peace, Marceline's love has become the quiet foundation beneath it, a reminder that survival isn't just about strength or power, but about connection. She embodies the truth that to live forever and still care deeply is the bravest thing anyone can do. Love doesn't make her less immortal. It makes her infinitely human. And in that humanity lies her salvation. For as long as Marceline has existed, she has lived in a world that sees her as something other, something strange, dangerous, maybe even monstrous. It's the first identity the world ever gave her, and for centuries it was the one she believed most deeply. But what makes her story remarkable is how she learns to see that word, monster, not as a curse, but as a mirror. Through it, she comes to understand herself, her fears, and her compassion. The monster is not what she is, it's what she carries and what she learns to live with. When Marceline became a vampire, she didn't just gain powers, she lost something too. Her humanity, in the literal sense, was stripped from her. But that change wasn't only physical. It reshaped how others looked at her, and how she looked at herself. People feared her strength, her hunger, her immortality. And though she could laugh it off, that fear sank into her. She began to see herself through their eyes, as a creature set apart. Her reflection in the mirror was no longer familiar. For a long time, she avoided mirrors altogether. Because what do you do when the world tells you you're something dark and you start to believe it? At first, she embraced the role. Being the Vampire Queen was easier than being misunderstood. It gave her a persona, a kind of armor. She turned fear into power, alienation into performance. If people were going to call her a monster, she'd be the best monster Ooh had ever seen, proud, unpredictable, untouchable. But that defiance, though bold, was lonely. Because even if she could command respect, it didn't fill the silence of being apart. The crown she wore was metaphorical long before it was literal, heavy, glittering, and isolating. The truth is that Marceline's so-called monstrosity was never about what she was, but what she felt. Vampirism magnified her emotional contradictions, hunger and restraint, anger and affection, pride and shame. Her need for blood mirrored her need for connection, something she craved but was afraid to take. It's the same duality that defines her emotional life. She wants closeness, but she's terrified of hurting the people she loves. She wants to be seen, but she hides behind sarcasm and song. Every part of her supernatural nature is tied to something deeply human: desire, fear, the need to belong. This tension is what makes Marceline's story so moving. Unlike many characters in Ooh, her struggle isn't to defeat monsters, but to coexist with one, the one inside her. Over time, she learns that monstrosity isn't evil. It's just the part of herself that feels too much. Her fangs, her strength, her longevity, they're symbols of her sensitivity turned outward. The same hunger that once made her afraid of herself becomes the empathy that allows her to understand others. the monster doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. Marceline's relationship with others reveals how this acceptance grows. With Bubblegum, it's especially clear. Bubblegum never truly saw Marceline as a monster, even when Marceline did. That faith, quiet, persistent, sometimes frustrated, helps Marceline begin to separate who she is from what she's been called. Bubblegum represents reason, control, and science, the opposite of everything wild in Marceline. Yet instead of rejecting her for it, she learns to love it. Their bond becomes a sanctuary where Marceline doesn't have to hide her shadow. That kind of love doesn't erase the monster, it tames it through understanding. Simon's role in this process is just as important. In the early days, he never treated her as anything less than human. Even as the world fell apart, he saw in her not a creature of the night, but a child with a beating heart. That memory of being loved before she was feared stays with her. It becomes her moral compass. Every time she feels herself slipping into darkness or detachment, she remembers Simon's kindness, and it pulls her back. In that way, he becomes a kind of mirror too, showing her the reflection she can't always see herself. But acceptance isn't something Marceline achieves all at once. There are moments when she still slips, still turns her sharpness into walls. The vampire inside her is both literal and symbolic. It's her instinct to isolate, to protect herself from pain by pretending she doesn't need anyone. She feeds on emotion just as much as she does on blood, and sometimes that hunger takes over. The need to be validated, the fear of being abandoned, the impulse to lash out before she can be hurt. But every time she falls into those patterns, she learns a little more about how to climb out. Growing up, for Marceline, means realizing that strength doesn't mean denying her darkness. It means living with it and still choosing kindness. Her music becomes the bridge between the monster and the girl. When she sings, she's both predator and poet. Her voice trembles with centuries of contradictions, anger softened by empathy, pride laced with sadness, playfulness shadowed by pain. The stage becomes a place where her two selves meet. The audience sees the Vampire Queen, radiant and wild, but they also hear the child who once sang to survive. Through her songs, she reclaims the parts of herself that fear and shame tried to bury. She turns her monstrosity into art, her isolation into connection. The symbolism of her vampirism goes deeper still. Vampires are creatures caught between life and death, belonging to neither world completely. Marceline's existence reflects that same in-betweenness, between human and immortal, between joy and sorrow, between past and present. But what she eventually learns is that in-between doesn't mean incomplete, it means expansive. She embodies contradiction because she contains contradiction. Her duality isn't something to fix, it's what gives her depth. Ooh itself mirrors this lesson. It's a land full of beings who blur categories, candy people, talking animals, magical hybrids, living rainbows. Marceline's journey from self-loathing to self-acceptance mirrors the world's own evolution toward harmony. In a sense, she becomes a symbol of Oo's heart, proof that even the so-called monsters belong. Her friendship with beings like Finn and Jake reinforces that message. They never fear her for what she is. They treat her like anyone else, weird, funny, sometimes moody, always lovable. Through them, she learns that monstrosity only has power if you give it meaning. The transformation of how she sees herself is subtle but profound. Early Marceline wears her identity like armor. Later, Marceline wears it like skin. There's no separation between her power and her compassion. She no longer feels the need to hide her fangs or explain her darkness. She simply exists, honest, whole, and free. That freedom is what finally releases her from the cycle of shame that haunted her for centuries. By accepting the monster, she stops fighting herself. And in doing so, she discovers that the monster was never her enemy. It was her shadow, the part of her that kept her alive when everything else fell apart. The part that demanded she keep feeling even when it hurt. The part that, once embraced, becomes her greatest strength. It's this self-acceptance that allows her to love fully, to forgive easily, to live peacefully. The monster, it turns out, was just her humanity in disguise, wounded, loud, and desperate to be loved. When Marceline finally finds balance, when she stands beside Bubblegum, not as a queen or a creature, but simply as herself, she proves that there's no such thing as being too broken to belong. She becomes a testament to what Adventure Time has always quietly whispered, that everyone in Ooh, no matter how strange or scarred, deserves love. Her reflection, once feared, is no longer something she hides from. She can look at herself and smile, fangs, and all, because she's learned that every part of her, the soft, the sharp, the scared, is still her. The monster and the girl have become one voice, singing the same song. In that harmony, the fear of growing up finally fades. Because to grow up, for Marceline, was never about leaving the monster behind. It was about learning to live with it, to love it, to let it sing. Time has never been a straight line for Marceline. It bends, stretches, and folds in on itself, like the chords of one of her songs, familiar but always changing. For most of her life, time was the enemy. It took everything from her, the world she was born into, the people she loved, the feeling of being part of something that could end. When you live forever, loss stops being an event. It becomes a rhythm. Every century carries its own ache. For Marceline, that ache became the backdrop of existence. But as she grows, not older, but wiser, she learns something that time alone could never teach her. Peace isn't found by escaping time, but by forgiving it. Forgiveness doesn't come easily to her. It's not in her nature to let things go. Her emotions have always been intense, sharp, and consuming. When she feels love, she feels it fully. When she feels hurt, she holds it close, sometimes for centuries. The grudges she carries are never about malice, they're about memory. She remembers pain too clearly. Every betrayal, every abandonment, every misunderstanding leaves a mark that time cannot erase. And yet, forgiveness is exactly what her immortal heart needs to stay alive. Without it, memory curdles into bitterness, and eternity becomes unbearable. Marceline's journey toward forgiveness begins quietly. It doesn't happen through revelation or grand speeches, but through small acts of release. A song written without anger, a conversation that doesn't end in sarcasm, a moment where she chooses to stay instead of running away. It's in these moments that she starts to see time differently, not as something that takes, but as something that transforms. Time doesn't heal on its own. It offers opportunities to heal. Marceline begins to understand that peace is a choice she has to make, again and again, as surely as she chooses to sing. Her first step toward that peace is forgiving Simon. It's the hardest one. For centuries, she loved him and hated what he became. The Ice King's madness stole the only father figure she ever had, leaving her with a wound that immortality could never close. Every encounter with him was a collision between past and present, between who he was and what he'd become. She tried to act indifferent, to hide her sorrow beneath jokes and indifference. But every word he forgot was a dagger. To forgive him meant accepting that he was gone long before she could save him. When she finally finds closure, it's not because he's restored to who he once was, but because she learns to see him as whole, even in his brokenness. She realizes that love isn't about holding on to people as they were, but loving them as they are, even when they change beyond recognition. Forgiving Simon isn't about forgetting his transformation. It's about letting the memory of their bond exist without resentment. It's an act of liberation, not just for him, but for herself. Her next act of forgiveness is directed inward. Marceline has always been her own harshest critic. She carries guilt like armor, guilt for surviving, for losing her temper, for pushing people away, for not being the person she thinks she should be. Immortality makes self-reflection unavoidable. Every mistake lingers long after its lesson is learned. But over time, she realizes that forgiving herself is the key to living freely. When she looks back at her younger self, the frightened girl, the reckless wanderer, the lonely queen, she stops seeing failure. She sees endurance. Every version of her was doing the best she could with the pain she had. Forgiveness, in this sense, becomes an act of compassion. Princess Bubblegum plays an unspoken part in this evolution. Their relationship, so often a storm of pride and longing, eventually becomes a quiet partnership built on understanding. For centuries, they misread each other, Bubblegum mistaking Marceline's walls for distance, Marceline mistaking Bubblegum's control for coldness. Forgiveness is what bridges that gap. They learn to accept that love doesn't erase differences, it allows them to coexist. There's a moment of stillness between them, unspoken but undeniable, when neither is trying to win or explain, only to be. That stillness is what peace looks like for Marceline. It's the end of defensiveness, the surrender to mutual acceptance. Through that relationship, Marceline learns that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's not submission or forgetfulness. It's strength, the kind that allows you to love without fear. To forgive someone doesn't mean you stop feeling the pain they caused. It means the pain stops controlling you. Marceline's centuries of emotional intensity begin to soften, not because she stops caring, but because she starts to trust that caring won't destroy her. Time itself begins to take on a new meaning. Where once it was an adversary, it becomes a collaborator. She no longer counts the years or measures change by who she's lost. Instead, she starts to see eternity as space, room to grow, to create, to love again. Time gives her infinite chances to get it right, to try again after every mistake. And because she no longer clings to guilt or fear, her immortality stops feeling like punishment. It becomes peace, a quiet, open-ended promise. Her music reflects this change. The melancholy of her early songs doesn't disappear, but it transforms. The sadness remains, but it's tempered with warmth. Her lyrics become less about what's missing and more about what's been found. She starts writing songs not just for herself, but for the world. Lullabies for Oo, songs of comfort for anyone who's ever felt lost or forgotten. Her music, once her way of mourning, becomes her way of giving back. In every note, there's a sense of forgiveness, toward time, toward the world, toward the endless cycle of love and loss. Even her relationship with her own power changes. Once, she feared what her vampirism symbolized: hunger, aggression, isolation. But now, she sees it as part of the natural rhythm of her being. The same force that once separated her from others now connects her to them. Her immortality allows her to bear witness, to remember the lessons that others forget. She becomes a living archive of compassion, not a monument to suffering, but a keeper of continuity. Her longevity becomes a gift she can use to preserve love, not just endure it. As time continues to move, Marceline doesn't transcend her emotions, she harmonizes with them. she still feels loss. She still has moments of melancholy. But those feelings no longer define her. They coexist with joy, humour, and quiet contentment. The fear of growing up that haunted her for centuries finally dissolves, not because she's escaped change, but because she's embraced it. Growing up, she realizes, isn't about reaching an endpoint. It's about learning to live with impermanence, to find beauty in things that don't last, and peace in the fact that she does. In the quiet after everything, after the wars, the heartbreaks, the centuries of solitude, Marceline finds herself surrounded by the people she loves. Finn and Jake have grown older. Bubblegum is still by her side. The world is calm for once. There's no great threat, no cosmic disaster, no reason to run. And in that stillness, she feels something she hasn't felt in ages. Rest, not exhaustion, but the kind of rest that comes from knowing you've stopped fighting yourself. Forgiveness has given her that. Time has taught her that even in a life without endings, peace is something you have to create, not something you wait for. It's a song you write one verse at a time, knowing it might never be finished, and that's okay. When Marceline sings now, her voice carries centuries, but it sounds lighter than ever. There's no bitterness, no regret. Just the gentle rhythm of someone who has finally made peace with the flow of time. She no longer fears growing up, because she understands that growth never really stops. It's not a destination, it's a way of being. And forgiveness, for others, for herself, for the world, is what keeps it alive. In the end, Marceline's immortality isn't defined by how long she lives, but by how deeply she learns to forgive. That's the true shape of her peace. It's not loud or triumphant. It's quiet, steady, and enduring, like the last note of a song that doesn't fade, but simply becomes part of the air. When time stretches into eternity, the meaning of legacy changes. For most beings, legacy is what they leave behind after they're gone. A memory, a story, a trace of love. But for Marceline, who never leaves, legacy is what she gives while she stays. Her presence itself becomes a kind of inheritance. She's lived long enough to see Ooh break, rebuild, and transform. Yet through every version of the world, she remains, a constant rhythm beneath the noise, an echo that never fades. What she passes on isn't just memory, but emotional wisdom. She becomes one of Ooh's quiet teachers, even if she never calls herself one. There was a time when the future terrified her, not because she feared change, but because she feared being left behind by it. Every generation seemed to move further from the one before, building a world less recognizable to her eyes. She'd seen so many beginnings already, how could she keep finding purpose in more of them? But as she grew, she began to understand that the future isn't something you chase or resist, it's something you nurture. Every song she sang, every friendship she kept, every act of kindness, those were seeds planted in the soil of tomorrow. She didn't need to shape the future, she only needed to love it into being. The Ooh that follows her peace is not the Ooh she once knew. It's softer, calmer, filled with new faces who've only heard stories of her adventures, her music, her fierce independence. To them, she's part myth, part memory, a figure who lives somewhere between legend and lullaby. Children whisper about the Vampire Queen, who can sing the sun to sleep, who drinks red but bleeds colour back into the world. And sometimes, on quiet nights, those children hear faint chords drifting through the wind, and they know she's real. Marceline never sets out to be a legend, and that's precisely why she becomes one. She never tries to lead or command, never seeks to control Ooh's destiny. She simply lives honestly, openly, with a heart that still feels deeply. And in doing so, she becomes a model of what survival can look like when it's rooted in compassion rather than fear. To the new generations, she represents the possibility of harmony between difference, between past and future, between strength and softness, between monster and human. Her influence can be felt in small, almost invisible ways. Musicians across Ooo play songs inspired by her melodies, not knowing she's listening from the shadows with a faint smile. Artists paint her without ever meeting her, using her image as a symbol of courage and authenticity. Even the way people talk about love changes, more open, more forgiving, more patient, because of the example she and Bubblegum set. They've become a story that children grow up hearing. Two people who found each other again and again, through centuries, proving that time can't erase connection if it's real. But for Marceline, the most meaningful legacy is not admiration, it's continuity. She watches Ooo thrive and change, and for once, she doesn't feel separate from it. She feels woven into it, like a quiet bass line beneath a world that keeps composing new melodies. Her songs, once private confessions, become cultural memory. They're sung around campfires and in quiet rooms by people who will never know her, yet somehow understand her. Her pain, once personal, becomes communal healing. There's something poetic in that. For so long, Marceline thought her immortality meant watching everything fade. But now she sees it differently. Time doesn't just take, it echoes. Every kindness she's shown, every word she's sung, reverberates through generations. Even when she withdraws to solitude, her presence lingers in the world like the afterglow of music. She's learned that peace isn't silence, it's resonance. Her relationship with Bubblegum matures alongside this new era. They don't need to prove anything anymore or hide behind pride and performance. Their love exists in the quiet rhythms of daily life, in shared laughter, in long silences that don't feel empty, in the comfort of simply being together while the world around them moves forward. They've both seen centuries of change, but for the first time, they're not chasing or resisting it. They're part of it. Time no longer separates them, it sustains them. Sometimes Marceline still wanders alone, not out of loneliness, but out of curiosity. She travels through the distant corners of Ooo, meeting new creatures, hearing their stories, and recognizing fragments of herself in all of them. In their music, their art, their resilience, she sees her own echo. The world she once feared losing has become her reflection, colourful, unpredictable, alive. And in its newness, she finds purpose again. Her connection to Simon, too, carries into this future. Even after his own long story finds peace, his memory remains alive in her. She tells his story sometimes, not with sadness, but with gratitude. She talks about the man who saved her when she was small, who taught her that love could exist even at the end of the world. For the people of Ooo, Simon becomes a name from the past. For Marceline, he remains a note in every song, the part of her that remembers kindness, that chooses empathy. Through her, his legacy endures. There's something profound about the way Marceline becomes history without ever becoming distant. Most legends harden into symbols. They lose their humanity in the retelling. But Marceline's legend stays soft, full of heart and imperfection. Maybe it's because she never hides. She still laughs too loud, still teases, still gets moody sometimes. The people who meet her realize that the stories don't capture her at all, that she's not a ghost of the past, but a living, breathing melody. And that realization gives Ooo something even more valuable than awe to connection. Her immortality, once a burden, now becomes a gift she can give to others, not through advice, but through presence. She's there when others need comfort, when they're afraid of loss or change, She doesn't always speak, but her existence says enough. I've seen the world end and begin again. It's okay to keep going. That's her lesson to the generations after her. Not that pain can be avoided, but that it can be survived with grace. Over time, Marceline becomes less of a figure in Ooh and more of a presence around it. Her influence is felt like a scent on the wind or a half-heard song. Some claim she guards the edges of the land. Others say she's taken to travelling the skies with Lady Rainicorn's descendants, playing her bass among the clouds. The truth doesn't matter. What matters is that she endures, not as a ruler, not as a legend, but as a feeling. In her, Ooh sees what it means to grow beyond fear. She embodies the idea that change isn't something to resist, but something to befriend. The young look up at her and understand that identity can shift without losing its core, that even in a world of magic and monsters, love and forgiveness are the real sources of power. Marceline has become more than the Vampire Queen. She's the rhythm that reminds Ooh how to keep its heart beating. And when she plays now, her songs are lighter, not because she's forgotten pain, but because she's learned how to carry it gently. Her voice doesn't tremble with longing anymore, it glows with contentment. Every note she sings feels like a bridge between centuries, between the ruins she once walked and the gardens that now bloom. The past and the future meet in her voice, and for a moment they sound the same. Marceline once feared growing up because she thought it meant losing who she was. But standing in this gentler world, surrounded by laughter and new life, she finally understands that growing up isn't about leaving your old self behind. It's about watching that self echo through others, through the people who love, create, and dream, because you once did. The fear is gone. What remains is gratitude. The future doesn't belong to her alone anymore. It belongs to everyone who carries her echo, everyone who keeps singing the song she once wrote under a red sky, back when she thought the world was ending. She was wrong, of course. The world never ends. It just changes its tune. And somewhere in that endless music, Marceline keeps playing, not louder than the rest, not above it, but perfectly in time. Change has always been the one thing Marceline couldn't control, the one current she could never swim against. From the day she was born, her world was in motion, crumbling, mutating, rebuilding itself in strange new shapes. She watched civilizations turn to dust, watched forests grow over ruins, watched friends grow old and disappear while she stayed the same. For a long time, change felt like loss. Every transformation of the world seemed to take something from her, a memory, a face, a reason to feel at home. But with time, she came to see that change wasn't her enemy. It was the rhythm that gave her eternity meaning. For someone immortal, the hardest thing to learn is how to move at the world's pace. Mortals change quickly. They have to. They grow, falter, reinvent themselves in the short space of a lifetime. Marceline doesn't have that urgency. She can stay in one feeling, one memory, one identity for centuries. But what immortality gives in stability, it takes in renewal. To grow, she has to learn to let go again and again. The lesson never gets easier, but it becomes gentler. Instead of fighting change, she begins to flow with it. At first, her resistance was a kind of grief. Every time Ooh changed, she saw ghosts of what it used to be. She'd look at the Candy Kingdom and remember the wastelands that came before it. Remember the quiet years with Simon, when the sky was red and the air was still. Every sound, every colour, every new kingdom rising out of the old made her feel further from the world that had once felt like hers. And because she couldn't die, she couldn't leave that grief behind. She carried it like an echo, hearing old songs in new places. But then she began to notice something. The world wasn't leaving her behind. It was inviting her to change with it. Every generation had its own music, its own laughter, its own way of expressing love and fear. When Marceline listened, really listened, she heard herself in those new voices. The rhythm of Ou, chaotic, playful, unpredictable, matched her own. Change wasn't a threat to her identity. It was proof that her story was still alive. Her music became the bridge between past and future. In the beginning, she wrote to remember, to hold on to what was lost. But as time went on, her songs became less about memory and more about motion. They carried the pulse of renewal. She started playing with younger musicians, experimenting with new sounds, blending her centuries-old melodies with the raw energy of people who still believed the world could surprise them. And every time she played with someone new, she rediscovered that same belief. The music changed, and she changed with it. This openness wasn't easy. Marceline's instinct had always been to protect herself through distance, to retreat when things felt uncertain, to stay safe in what she already knew. But growth asks for vulnerability. To live in the rhythm of change, she had to trust the unknown. She had to believe that even if everything she loved shifted again, there would still be beauty in the new shape it took. That faith didn't come from optimism. It came from experience. She had seen the world end, and she had seen it rebuild. She knew now that destruction and creation were not opposites, they were verses in the same song. Bubblegum helped her understand that on a deeper level. For centuries, bubblegum had been the architect of Ou's future, rebuilding, redesigning, adapting. Change was her language. Where Marceline once saw transformation as loss, bubblegum saw it as continuity. Their love became the meeting point of those two perspectives. Bubblegum learned to slow down, to savour what already was, while Marceline learned to move forward without fear. Together, they found balance. Their relationship stopped being about holding on and became about evolving side by side. When Marceline looked at Ou through that lens, she started to see the beauty in impermanence. The Candy Kingdom rebuilt countless times. The Ice Kingdom melted and reshaped, the forests growing thicker, the deserts spreading thinner, the stars themselves changing colours overhead. Everything in Ou was in conversation with time, a constant dialogue of becoming. Even the ruins of the old world, the remnants of human civilization, had found purpose again as homes for new life. And Marceline realized that her immortality wasn't about defying that process. It was about witnessing it, celebrating it, learning from it. There's a tenderness in the way she adapts. She doesn't force herself to forget the past. She just stops comparing it to the present. Each version of Ou, each era of her own life, becomes a verse in her story. There's the world of ruins, the world of kingdoms, the world of peace, each one shaping her differently. She doesn't belong to any of them entirely, but she touches all of them. In her songs, all the versions of Ou exist together, layered like harmonies. Her music becomes a map of time, proof that change doesn't erase, it composes. The people around her change too. Finn grows wiser. Jake's memory lingers in the laughter of his children. The friends she's lost become stories told by the ones who remain. Marceline no longer mourns that. Instead, she learns to love how life continues through others. Every person she meets is a reminder that time doesn't take, it transforms. The child she comforts today will become the guardian of tomorrow. The song she plays in one lifetime might inspire another in the next. The rhythm of change keeps everyone connected, even across centuries. Sometimes, Marceline still feels the weight of eternity, that strange pause when everything around her moves faster than she can follow. But when it happens, she listens. The world always has a new sound waiting. Maybe it's the hum of technology in a rebuilt city, or the chatter of new creatures born from magic and chance, or the soft murmur of water running through land that was once wasteland. Whatever it is, it reminds her that she's still part of something alive. She doesn't need to define herself by what came before. She just needs to keep playing along. Her fear of growing up, the fear that started her whole story, was never really about age. It was about the belief that change meant losing yourself. But after centuries of witnessing transformation, she's learned the truth. Change is yourself. It's the proof that you're still here, still feeling, still capable of becoming. Every version of Marceline, the child, the queen, the wanderer, the lover, the artist, still lives within her. Change doesn't replace, it layers. Growing up isn't a loss of identity, it's the expansion of it. And when she plays now, her songs are filled with that understanding. They sound like water flowing through rock, gentle but unstoppable. The notes rise and fall like the seasons, reflecting the truth she's spent centuries learning, that nothing stays, and that's what makes it beautiful. Sometimes she performs for others, sometimes just for herself, but always there's a smile at the corner of her mouth, as if she's listening to a joke the universe told her a long time ago. A joke about how everything changes, and somehow that's what keeps it all the same. Marceline doesn't need permanence anymore. She doesn't crave the stillness she once mistook for peace. She's found a better rhythm, one that moves, breathes, and flows. The rhythm of change. It's in her songs, in her laughter, in the quiet moments she shares with bubblegum as the sun rises over a world that's never the same twice. It's in the way she forgives the past without erasing it, the way she greets each tomorrow not with fear but with curiosity. In Ooh, change never stops. Magic fades, then returns in new forms. Kingdoms rise, creatures evolve. Love redefines itself again and again. And through it all, Marceline keeps playing, her music weaving through centuries like a thread that ties it all together. She doesn't try to preserve the old world or predict the new one. She just listens. She lets the rhythm guide her, and in doing so, she becomes what she always was meant to be. Not the queen of vampires, not the guardian of the past, but the musician of time itself. Every era in Ooh has its own sound, but if you listen closely, underneath it all, you can still hear her bass, steady, low, eternal. It's the heartbeat of the land, the rhythm of change, the sound of someone who has finally made peace with never standing still. There comes a point in Marceline's story when even time seems to quiet around her. The world no longer feels like something she's trying to keep up with or understand. It feels like something she's part of. The rhythm of change that once frightened her has become her pulse. Every sunrise feels familiar, every night full of new melodies waiting to be found. She no longer measures her life in centuries or heartbreaks, but in songs, each one a small constellation of memory, emotion, and meaning. By now, Marceline has lived through so many versions of Ooh that it's hard to say where the world ends and she begins. Her story and the lands have become the same song, echoing beyond both of them. In these later years, Marceline finds peace in the smallest things. She spends more time in the open air, watching clouds drift across the sky, sometimes playing her bass quietly while the light shifts around her. The sky has always fascinated her, vast, untouchable, constantly changing, yet always there. In a way, it's the perfect metaphor for her own heart. She has been through countless storms and sunrises, but she's still herself, still open, still alive. The fear that used to haunt her, the fear of losing control, of being left behind, of never feeling at home, has transformed into calm acceptance. She doesn't need everything to stay the same anymore. She's learned that love, memory, and music can exist even as everything else moves. Sometimes she still sings about the past, about Simon's kindness, about her lonely childhood, about the endless days of wandering. But those songs have changed too. The sadness in them has softened into gratitude. She no longer sings to hold on to what's gone, but to celebrate that it once was. Her voice, once sharp and trembling, now carries the warmth of someone who understands that loss isn't the opposite of love, it's proof of it. Every song she plays now feels like a prayer for everything she's known. The people who shaped her, the places that raised her, the worlds that came and went. Her music travels farther than ever before. Sometimes she plays for an audience, sometimes just for herself, but the songs always find their way across Uu. They drift over forests and deserts, over the new cities that rise where ruins once stood. People hear them without knowing where they come from. A faint hum in the distance, a melody on the wind. It's as if the world itself has become her instrument. Her music no longer belongs to her alone. It belongs to everyone who listens, everyone who keeps the rhythm of love and change alive. In that sense, Marceline transcends what she once was. She's still the Vampire Queen, still the rocker, still the friend and lover, but those titles no longer define her. She's something quieter and wider, a spirit of sound, of memory, of harmony. Her immortality has found purpose. Instead of fearing eternity, she uses it to keep the song of the world going, to remind Uu that nothing truly ends, it only changes tune. Princess Bubblegum often joins her on these quiet nights. Their love, by now, is effortless. They no longer need to prove it or protect it. It's woven into the fabric of their days, a steady presence that feels as natural as breathing. They've both grown softer with time, more curious than controlling, more tender than guarded. When Marceline plays, Bubblegum listens. When Bubblegum experiments with her science or tends her garden, Marceline hums in the background. They don't need words to communicate anymore. After centuries of miscommunication and pride, silence has become their shared language. It's in those silences that Marceline feels most connected to everything. She can hear Uu itself, the heartbeat of the land, the laughter of its people, the whispers of old friends. Finn's descendants telling his stories, the candy folk rebuilding once again, the rainicorns gliding across twilight skies. She can feel their energy through the ground beneath her feet, and she plays for them, a slow, low tune that carries love into the air. Sometimes she imagines the sound reaching beyond the atmosphere, out into the stars. Maybe someone, somewhere, far from Uu, can hear her. A quiet song from a small, strange world full of life and kindness. The idea comforts her. She used to think that immortality meant being trapped, but now she sees that it means being endless, not in body, but in meaning. She's not bound by time anymore. She's part of it. Every version of herself, every phase of Uu, every person she's ever loved still lives through her. She's a chorus made of all her past voices. Even if the universe changes again, even if Uu one day becomes something entirely different, her music will remain not in recordings or relics, but in the hearts of whatever comes next. Her songs have always been about truth. Even when she didn't mean them to be, they revealed her. They exposed the hidden corners of her heart, the longing, the laughter, the fear. But now her truth has changed. She no longer sings to prove who she is. She sings because the world needs her voice, because sound connects what memory can't. She knows that no song lasts forever, but that's not the point. The point is to sing anyway. Sometimes, when she looks at the sky, Marceline wonders if Simon would recognize her now. Not her face, that hasn't changed much, but her spirit, she hopes he would. She thinks he would smile, proud that the little girl he once protected has grown into someone who can protect the world in return. And maybe, somewhere beyond the stars, his echo answers her, the way echoes always do. As centuries pass, Marceline's presence becomes subtler. She appears less often in the bustling parts of U, preferring the edges of mountains, the tops of cliffs, the places where the wind carries sound farthest. Some say she lives among the clouds now, her songs blending with thunder and rain. Others believe she became part of U itself, her soul spread through the rivers, the trees, the air. But those who truly know her understand. She never left. She just learned how to exist everywhere at once. The Vampire Queen, the Wanderer, the Child, the Lover, the Friend, all those names fade into one truth. Marceline is music. She is the melody that connects the living and the remembered, the past and the possible. Her songs no longer come from fear or loneliness, but from peace. And in that peace, she finds transcendence. When she plays now, the world listens, not out of reverence, but out of recognition. Her bass hums like a heartbeat, low and steady, blending with the wind, the waves, and the laughter of life itself. There's no beginning or end to her music anymore. It loops endlessly, flowing through U like the breath of the land. It's a love song for everything she's ever known, and everything she'll never need to fear again. Marceline once spent centuries trying to escape her own eternity, but now eternity feels like home. She doesn't need to conquer it, doesn't need to fill it. She just lives inside it, as effortlessly as she breathes. The sky stretches endlessly above her, the same sky that watched her grow, the same one that will outlast her, the same one that holds every song she's ever sung. And in that vastness, she smiles, because she finally understands what she's been singing about all along. That growing up was never about letting go, it was about learning to expand. That love doesn't end, it transforms. That change doesn't erase, it carries forward. And that peace isn't found in silence, but in harmony. Her final song isn't final at all. It's still playing, somewhere beyond the sky, a gentle, endless refrain that says, "I'm here, I've always been here, and I'll keep singing for as long as there's someone left to listen." For all the songs Marceline has ever written, there's one melody that never truly ends, the one she shares with Princess Bubblegum. It has no beginning, no chorus, no refrain. It changes with every era of their lives, sometimes loud and electric, sometimes so soft it can only be felt in the air between them. If U itself has a heartbeat, their love is part of its rhythm. It began as discord, two people too different to understand each other, and became harmony. Not perfect, not constant, but alive. There was a time when their differences seemed too great to overcome. Bubblegum lived by logic, building walls of reason to protect the kingdom and herself. Marceline lived by instinct, breaking rules as easily as she broke hearts. Where Bubblegum sought order, Marceline thrived in chaos. For years, their love existed in that tension, a balance between control and release, head and heart, day and night. They clashed because they were mirrors, both brilliant, both afraid, both too proud to admit how deeply they cared. But even when they drifted apart, something invisible kept drawing them back. Their love was gravitational. In the quiet centuries that followed their reconciliation, they finally learned the rhythm of coexistence. It's not about merging into one another or becoming identical. It's about playing in sync while keeping their own voices. Bubblegum still wakes early, planning, experimenting, building new forms of life from sugar and science. Marceline still sleeps late, wandering, writing, humming to the stars. Their lives move at different tempos, But when they meet, over coffee or laughter or music, time folds around them. The world feels balanced. What makes their love eternal isn't just its longevity, it's that they grow with it. Most romances fade because one person changes faster than the other. Marceline and Bubblegum evolve at the same speed, just in different directions, always finding new ways to meet in the middle. They've seen each other at their worst, at their most stubborn, jealous and scared, and yet they never stop choosing each other. Love, for them, is not the absence of conflict. It's the willingness to return after it. There's a kind of symmetry in how their lives intertwine. Bubblegum brings structure to Marceline's wandering, and Marceline brings spontaneity to Bubblegum's routine. They balance each other the way day balances night, not by erasing the dark, but by giving it a place to rest. When Marceline's moods drift into melancholy, Bubblegum grounds her with quiet acts of care. A touch on the shoulder, a cup of tea, a new gadget designed just to make her smile. When Bubblegum becomes too consumed by her work, too burdened by her sense of duty, Marceline pulls her away from the lab and into the sky. Together, they remind each other that logic needs laughter and freedom needs focus. Their relationship becomes a living metaphor for OO itself. The world they inhabit is a blend of science and magic, chaos and order, destruction and rebirth, exactly like them. The survival of OO depends on the same balance that defines their love. In Bubblegum, there's the mind of civilization. In Marceline, the heart of nature. Together, they embody the principle that life endures through balance, not domination. Theirs is the duet that keeps the song of the world in tune. Over the years, they begin to influence one another in subtle ways. Bubblegum starts to understand that not everything has to be controlled to be safe. She learns to listen, not just to others, but to herself, and to trust that the world can hold itself up without her constant supervision. Marceline helps her find that faith. In return, Bubblegum teaches Marceline that consistency isn't confinement, that responsibility can coexist with freedom. For the first time in her life, Marceline sees stability not as stagnation, but as care, the slow, steady rhythm that lets love grow. They build a life that is both simple and infinite. Their home changes over time, sometimes a castle balcony, sometimes a quiet house near a lake, sometimes a lab filled with instruments and sunlight. Wherever they are, music fills the space. Marceline plays, Bubblegum tinkers. Sometimes they work separately for days, then spend entire nights doing nothing but talking, reminiscing, or lying in silence. The silence between them is never empty. It's full of shared history, centuries of laughter, heartbreak, forgiveness, and joy condensed into quiet understanding. Their love also becomes a kind of leadership, though neither of them intends it that way. The people of OO see in them a model for coexistence. The scientist and the monster, the ruler and the wanderer, the rational and the emotional. Together, they show that difference isn't division, it's strength. They never preach, never rule together, never try to define what their love means. They simply live it, and in doing so, they make it easier for others to love freely. There's a beauty in how ordinary their eternity becomes. It's not grand or dramatic, it's peaceful. They've lived through wars, endings, and rebirths, but now their days are small and content. They tend gardens, they feed passing creatures, they listen to new bands in the city. Sometimes, Marceline writes songs just for Bubblegum, not about heartbreak or loss, but about peace, about gratitude, about how strange and lucky it feels to still be here together. Every so often, Marceline looks at her and feels the same jolt she did centuries ago, that quiet awe that someone so brilliant, so different, could see her love her, choose her, and Bubblegum, for all her composure, still melts when Marceline smiles. The spark between them never dulls. It just changes temperature from the heat of youth to the warmth of home. When they perform together, which they sometimes do, though rarely in public, it's more than music. It's a conversation between elements. Marceline's bass rumbles like earth and blood. Bubblegum's voice floats above it like light refracted through sugar. The sound they make together feels ancient and new all at once. It's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. It's honest. Their duet isn't about harmony in the technical sense. It's about coexistence. Two notes that shouldn't fit, but somehow do. In time, their love stops being a story about reconciliation and becomes one about rhythm. They move together through centuries as easily as a melody moves through time. The fear that once haunted Marceline, the fear of growing up, of losing, of changing, has dissolved entirely. With Bubblegum beside her, she knows that change doesn't mean separation. It means new verses, new sounds, new ways of being together. Their eternity isn't static, it's dynamic, like music itself. Sometimes, late at night, they sit outside and watch the stars. Bubblegum studies them through her telescope. Marceline hums quietly, matching her music to the pulse of the universe. There's no tension, no drama, just two beings who have finally found their tempo. The sky stretches above them, full of motion and light, and for once, they don't feel small beneath it, they feel infinite. Their love, after all these years, has become the proof of everything they've both believed in. That reason and emotion can coexist, that love can endure without possession. That eternity isn't about never changing, it's about changing together. They are still opposites in many ways, but the friction between them has become music. The dissonance has turned to harmony. When people in OO speak of them now, it's not as a queen and a scientist, or even as a couple. They're simply Marcy and Bonnabelle, a name spoken like a single word, a gentle chord that feels like home. Their love has become something larger than romance, a philosophy, a rhythm, a way of living. And if you listen closely, when the wind moves through the valleys or the rain falls over the Candy Kingdom, you can sometimes hear it, two notes, one low and steady, one clear and bright, weaving through the air. It's their duet, the sound of balance, the song of OO itself. Because love, at its truest, is not possession or permanence. It's harmony. And Marceline and Bubblegum have finally become its eternal echo. When you've lived long enough to watch the world reinvent itself a dozen times, you stop thinking of forever as a distance. You stop counting years, stop fearing endings. You start realizing that eternity isn't about how long something lasts, it's about how deeply it's felt. Marceline used to think forever meant being trapped, caught in a loop of change she couldn't escape. But now she understands that forever isn't a curse. It's a feeling, the brief, shining moments that expand until they fill everything. Love that endures, laughter that lingers, songs that echo long after the last note fades. She sits on a hill overlooking the Candy Kingdom, the sky stretching out in hues of orange and violet. The air hums with quiet life, distant voices, rustling leaves, the soft ripple of a breeze that smells faintly of sugar. It's peaceful in a way that would have once made her restless. Now it just feels right. She plays her bass lazily, fingers tracing an old tune she doesn't even remember writing. It doesn't matter. The melody is simple, open, warm. Behind her, Bubblegum approaches, moving slower these days, not from weakness, but from comfort. Time has touched even her, not in the way it touches mortals, but gently, with the weight of centuries carried gracefully. Marceline looks up and smiles, the kind of smile that only comes from recognition that needs no words. Bonnibel sits beside her, their shoulders touching. They don't speak. They never have to. In the distance, ooh shimmers with life. The land that once was barren is now full of colour. Every corner holds some trace of the lives that came before, the laughter of Finn's descendants, the songs of new creatures born from magic and time. The ruins are still there too, but they're softened, overgrown, turned into gardens. Everything that once hurt has found a way to bloom. Marceline closes her eyes and listens. The sounds of ooh blend with her music, the rhythm of wind and life, intertwining. She feels the pulse of the world in her chest. It beats slow, steady, familiar. Once upon a time, she feared that this sound would leave her behind. Now she knows she's part of it. She thinks of Simon, the man who taught her kindness in the ruins of an ending world. For so long, her heart carried his memory like a wound, a reminder of what she couldn't save. But now, when she remembers him, it isn't with sorrow, it's gratitude. His voice still echoes inside her, a song of care that shaped everything she became. Somewhere, somehow, she hopes he knows that she's okay, that she learned to live the way he taught her to, with love first, with gentleness, even when the world feels sharp. Marceline looks at Bubblegum and feels that same gentleness reflected back at her. Their hands find each other's almost absently, an old habit turned instinct. They've had lifetimes together, fights, reconciliations, silences, laughter, and yet every moment still feels new. They've built a rhythm that doesn't depend on time. Each day is its own small eternity. They don't talk about the future anymore, they just live it. The sun dips lower, painting the horizon in deeper shades of gold and red. Marceline remembers the first time she saw a sky like this, when the world was falling apart, when she was still just a child clutching her bass and trying to make sense of the noise. Back then, sunsets felt like endings. Now, they feel like promises. Each one is proof that nothing ever really disappears. It just changes form. Light becomes colour. Day becomes night. Life becomes memory. She starts to hum, then sing, softly, for herself, for Bonnibel, for the world. The words are simple, maybe even a little clumsy, but her voice carries warmth instead of pain. It all keeps moving, it all keeps growing. Every end just keeps on going. Forever's not far, it's right where we are. In every song we keep knowing. Bubblegum listens, smiling faintly, her eyes close, and she leans against Marceline's shoulder. For a long time, they just stay like that, two shapes against the sky, the air full of colour and calm. There's no need for grand gestures, no cosmic conclusions. The peace between them says everything. Marceline realises something then, something she's been circling around for centuries without ever naming. Forever isn't the stretch of time ahead of her. It's the moments that make time stop. It's this: the weight of a shoulder against hers, the warmth of a hand she's held for countless years, the sound of the world still singing below them. She used to wonder what it would feel like when she'd seen everything, when there were no more songs to write, no more people to meet, no more worlds to discover. But she understands now that she'll never reach that point. There will always be something new, a sound, a smile, a tiny piece of beauty that didn't exist the day before. That's what keeps eternity from being empty. It keeps surprising her. As the last light fades, she looks up at the first stars. They've changed too, new constellations for a new age. But she still recognizes one or two faint reminders of old nights. She thinks about how those stars will keep shining long after even she's gone. how someone else will look up someday and see them, and feel the same small wonder she does now. That thought doesn't make her sad. It makes her smile. That's what forever is, not staying, but being felt. Bonnibel stirs beside her and murmurs, "That's pretty." Marceline grins. "Yeah," she says. "It's one of my better endings." But even as she says it, she knows it's not an ending at all. It's just another verse, another quiet night under a sky that never runs out of room for new songs. Later, when they walk back toward their home, the lights of the kingdom flicker softly in the distance. Marceline glances back at the hill, half expecting to hear her own melody echoing through the wind, and maybe she does. Or maybe it's the world singing back to her, a duet that's been going on for longer than she can measure. In that moment, she feels something she once thought she'd lost forever. Wonder, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that hums. The quiet awe of being alive, of still being here, of still finding beauty after everything. She doesn't need to be anything more than that. She's lived, she's loved, she's sung, and in the rhythm of the world, she's home. Forever isn't so long, she thinks. Not when you fill it with music. And with that, she smiles, a soft, lasting smile, as the night folds around them, gentle and endless, carrying her song into tomorrow.